Hi, my name's Charlie Howell. I was a writer for Scooby-Doo for a long time, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome back for a brand new installment of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the podcast that features a behind-the-scenes peek at the creation of this 50-year franchise of monsters, mysteries, and meddling kids. I'm your host, Mike Josick. Welcome to the show. So this episode is a long time coming. Future generations will not care about any of this information, so if you want to fast forward like a minute, you don't have to listen to any of this. But for anybody who listens regularly and checks out the show month after month as it actually gets released, this episode was supposed to come out in the first week of April. This episode features my interview with Scooby-Doo writer and story editor Duane Poole. It's a great interview. Duane has worked on several Scooby series, including the Scooby-Doo Dynomutt Hour, Laff-a-Lympics, and was a writer and story editor on the Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo Show, which I'll get to later. After this wonderful conversation with Duane, I went to check out the file to see how it turned out. Lo and behold, substantial technical audio glitch, and I was devastated. I knew I was not going to get this episode out on time. I did post on Twitter, the podcast handle on Twitter, at Scooby-Doo for anybody who doesn't already follow me there. I post most of the sort of happenings and goings on through there, and that's basically what I communicated to everybody, that the show was not going to come out as planned, technical difficulties, and I really needed to put a lot of work into getting the show presentable, which I think I've done. I'm actually quite happy with how it has turned out. Duane was great. Duane told some great stories about working at the studio and that period of the show, as well as some really great insights into the creation of Scrappy. We also discussed some of the fan theories that have developed over the years surrounding Scooby-Doo, and Duane kind of chimes in on those. Unfortunately, the Scrappy, and I believe most of that is in part 2, so I'm kind of getting your expectations up here, and you're going to have to wait for closure on that. But the good news there is, because the release of this episode has basically just been one big kind of snafu, I will be releasing both parts this month. So you have this episode right now, and then before the end of the month, I will be releasing part 2. And all the technical stuff is ironed out, and I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. This is the first time I kind of got the opportunity to take a peek behind the curtain at some of the earlier Scooby productions, so that was pretty cool. Anyways, I'm sure you guys are pretty eager to get to the interview itself, so without further ado, I will let you guys get to that. Enjoy the audio, happy listening, and I will see you on the other side.
Like, come on, Scrappy! Run now! Splat later!
I am speaking today with writer Duane Poole, who contributed to such Scooby shows as the Scooby-Doo Dynomutt Hour, Laff-a-Lympics, and was actually also the story editor of the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo Show. Is that not correct?
Right.
Welcome to the show, Duane. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be anywhere.
Now, one of the first things I ask all of my guests is, what was your first exposure to Scooby-Doo? When did you first come into contact with the property? Were you aware of it out there? Obviously, you weren't watching it as a kid. Or was the first time you really became aware of it when you started working at Hanna-Barbera and started working for the show?
Well, I certainly knew about the show. I mean, I knew about Scooby. I guess I'd watched it. It was probably when did it premiere? Was it back in the 60s, 69, maybe something like that?
September 13th, 1969.
Yeah, see, I was in my final couple of years of college back then, so it wasn't one of my prime viewing projects, but I certainly knew about Scooby. I think everybody knew about Scooby back then. It was more than just a kid's show. It had gotten into the popular culture, and so I was totally aware of it.
Were people actually watching it in college at that time? Was it making the rounds?
Oh, gosh, there probably was. I was at the time doing kids television myself up in Seattle. I was at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I was planning to be a major composer lyricist for the Broadway stage. That was my big goal. So one day there was an article in the Seattle Times about a new children's show that was about to premiere. It was called Let's Catch a Wish, and it was like a Muppet kind of show. Puppets created by a local puppeteer and one live character who was played by a former Miss Washington. She was only a couple years out of her title, I guess. And I thought it sounded like a great adventure, and that maybe they could use some songs, a way to plug my songs. So I wrote 6 songs that night based on this little newspaper article. Took them into the studio the next day down to King Television, and they hired me to be a writer and primarily a composer. They wanted me to write some songs, and I think I got $25 a song at that time, and they used about one a week. So it wasn't my primary source of income, but it was fun, and it got me into the sort of children's area. I began writing scripts for that show. That led to me doing a stage musical based on some of the characters, and that was seen by Hanna-Barbera, a financial concern in Seattle, picked up an option on the script and took me down to audition the script for all the various animation studios in town. One of them was Hanna-Barbera. I played and sang my songs and described the script to a couple of producers. Their names were Ray Allen and Harvey Bullock, who had taken over the live action department at Hanna-Barbera at the time. Turned out there really was no live action department, so I was. They liked what I'd written. They thought it was very fanciful and fun and bright, and for some reason they were a fan, and they asked me to come down and come on staff for them. So I packed everything in my 1965 red Malibu and drove from Seattle to Los Angeles and started to work at Hanna-Barbera.
How old would you have been at that time?
Well, that was 73, so I was 25. And I thought that was real Hollywood. I told all my friends in Seattle that I was going to go down, make a name for myself, and I'd be back in 6 months, and I'd be able to write long distance. Of course, I never did get back except for vacations. But it was a fun adventure. Hollywood was great at that time, and the studio was fun. It was exciting. Some terrific people to work with. They were giving me $200 a week to do these scripts for them, and I was churning out. Oh my God, the scripts were about 60 pages long, and I was doing at least one a day for them. So I got divide that by the 200, and I wasn't making much of script until one day there was a knock on my office door, and every other writer at the studio was outside saying, "Can we take you to lunch? You're being used." And they said not only was I making them look bad, but I wasn't being paid for my work. So that started the professional side of my career. After that, I sort of shaped up and realized what I needed to do.
The scripts were 60 pages for a half-an-hour show?
The scripts for some of them turned into 40, 50, 60 pages, yeah.
I'm surprised that they'd actually be that long. Was it because the shows were dialogue heavy?
It's because they're action heavy. That was the thing. It was action and dialogue both. But as you certainly have seen animated scripts by now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You describe everything. In a regular movie, in a regular TV series script, it's left heavily up to the director to decide when Scooby lifts his left paw, but in the animation script, you have to describe every single movement. So I probably went overboard on some of my descriptions, but it made it easy for the storyboard people.
So you started in live action. How did you transition to the animation side?
Yeah. There was a guy named Sid Morse who was a writer at the time there, a writer-producer at the time, and Ray and Harvey sort of pushed me into his office and said, "Let him teach you how to do this." I was given a sample Genie script, the Teen I Dream of Genie series that was on. And he said, just do something for this for me. So the next day I brought in about 15 pages of script, and he loved the jokes and thought that was all good. But he said, there's no story here. And I wasn't used to writing a story. I was used to starting with characters and letting it go wherever it went. So he was the one who taught me the importance of an outline, or at least a headline, so you know what you're writing toward. But I learned pretty quickly, and then I got on as a regular writer for a series called Goober and the Ghost Chasers, which was a sort of an ersatz Scooby. It wasn't. It was trying to recreate the Scooby magic, but that was with a frightened dog who would turn invisible. And Speed Buggy. There were several shows that I was shuffled around onto at the time. Yeah.
So what was the first show for the studio that you worked on?
Well, the first one was those 15 pages of Genie, and then I think the first actual script I wrote for them was was Speed Buggy, and then I did several for Goober and the Ghost Chasers.
At that time, did you get assigned to a show and you pretty much just worked exclusively on that show, or did you get bounced around the studio just kind of writing whatever they needed done for whatever show?
You kind of worked for the studio until I got to the point of being a story editor, and then it was specifically certain shows, or later on I produced or created series for them. But originally it was whatever someone might need. I was kind of the hired hand at that time to go get a quick script out for this series because it had to go into production right away to make air dates, or that series because something had fallen through. And I mean, it was really an assignment, kind of a shotgun sort of thing.
What was the writing process like at the time? Were writers assigned stories, or did they have to come in and actually pitch?
I think it was probably a combination. They may have had some. I mean, frequently, I know from my time as a story editor that we would come up with a lot of stories, so that if a writer came in we wanted to work with, if they didn't have something, if they pitched a few stories and it wasn't in the area that we needed, we could assign them something. So I'm sure back then, although I don't remember specifically, but I'm sure back then it was the same case with me, that they probably handed me an idea and I ran with it if I didn't have an idea of my own.
I remember reading a blog post from Mark Evanier who was saying that pitching for Hanna-Barbera at the time, particularly Scooby-Doo, was essentially you would come up with an idea, this monster, this mystery, and you would take it to the story editor, and the story editor would go through the list of things that had already been done, and if it had been done, can't do that, do something else, and if it hadn't been done, it got the thumbs up. Was that an accurate representation of what it was like?
That was to a great degree. It's really... Pitching is an art. There's such a way to do it and such a way not to do it. When I was working years later for Aaron Spelling, I was producing Hotel, a big anthology series that he did. And I remember a writer coming in, and Jim Brolin was the star of that, as you may recall or may not. But a writer came in and we said, okay, then just, what's the story? He says, well, Jim has a headache. And I said, okay. And he said, no, that's it. We can kind of go from there. And I said, your idea is that our main character has a headache. And we could, so some writers come in really prepared. Some just aren't prepared at all. But, back then the turnover was so fast. We had so many writers coming in and out the doors that I remember with Godzilla that I created later, we pretty much sat down early on and made a list of the stories we wanted to tell. Then it was always a nice surprise when a writer brought in something fresh that we hadn't considered. But they pretty much never left without an assignment if it was someone whose writing we liked.
Did you guys have anything like a writer's room at the studio on any of the shows?
No, not really. The only thing that resembled that was Joe would have these roundtable meetings occasionally with the main creators, the story editors, the producers, and we would talk in general about various series and specific about others. But as far as all the writers getting together, that didn't happen much, if ever. We were all kind of too busy with our own projects to take that time, actually. We had roundtables, we had writers' tables at lunch. A lot of us went to lunch every day together and kicked things around. But there wasn't, like on a sitcom, a writers' table sitting around and discussing the intricacies of, Scrappy's character, the finer points of his relationship with Uncle Scoob. That was not happening.
Bill and Joe were well known for basically being really hands-on in the respective departments that they kind of headed up.
Mm-hmm.
Joe was more development and Bill more production. I was just wondering if you had a lot of interaction with Joe and what that was like.
I was doing more with Joe than Bill early on because that was more the creative side of it. Bill was more the technical side of it. Later on, though, when I was producing and creating, it was with both of them. But most of my connection was with Joe Barbera. I loved them both. They were great guys. They didn't spend a lot of time together. They were on separate floors. Joe had the first floor with all the writers, and Bill had the second floor with all the artists and so on. But they were terrific, and Joe was a character. There should be a movie or a novel about him. Absolutely, he was known for his malaprops. I mean, he came into a network meeting one time. We were all waiting to pitch a new series, and he apologized for being late. He said, "I'm sorry, I just got off a plane." He'd been looking for a new location for a theme park. They were trying to find a Hanna-Barbera theme park idea. I think maybe it was sort of like what eventually became the Six Flags Hanna-Barbera sections. But he came into the meeting and said, "I'm sorry, I just got off a plane. I'm just back from Toronto, which I'm convinced is the last good place in the United States for a park." But he was a character. He became a really good friend. In fact, when I left animation behind to go over and do Heart to Heart and work for ABC and Aaron Spelling and so on, before I left, he offered me the vice presidency of Hanna-Barbera if I would stay. Wow. And I was so flattered and so touched. I almost did it just for him, but I really wanted to move on. You know, he was a good guy.
I've heard some pretty crazy stories about Joe Barbera, and most of them accented with a number of expletives. I'm assuming they're all true.
Oh, probably. I would love to hear them sometime when you have a chance.
Every time I read or hear someone talking about Joe, even when they're not talking about the best of times, the stories are always just laced with such great respect and nostalgia and humor, and I can only imagine that he was a very interesting character to be around and work for.
Yeah, of course. Well, Joe was almost an Italian stereotype. I mean, he had a restaurant in Hollywood that he went to, and we would go a couple times a week for lunch there. Was it the Villa Capri? I'm forgetting the name right now. That might be it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right there.
But it was he had his red booth, and he had his meal that was named after him, and he held court there, almost daily. He loved telling stories. It was sometimes hard to keep him on track, but he loved telling stories. And as you probably know, his daughter Jane worked at the studio as well. It was quite a team. Let me just say that. Overall, it was quite a team there. We loved it.
You're the first person I've spoken to from this early in Scooby's kind of timeline as far as how the show's progressed. And I've always wondered, Hanna-Barbera has this reputation because they did these shows for television on television budgets and used the planned animation and made so many shows. It has a reputation of having kind of a factory atmosphere.
Wow. It certainly had that factory feel in the art department and as they were cranking out the shows in the production side of things.
I just wonder what it was like from a creative point of view, because I have to assume that the writers and the artists that were involved in the show, I mean, there was a lot of really talented people at that studio, and they couldn't have just been mindlessly churning this stuff out. They had to have been trying to make a quality product on some level.
God, that's why I have a hard time. I mean, I know it was a factory to a degree that every studio becomes a factory at some point just to meet the demand. But I always felt like it was a family there. I always felt like the doors were almost always open in every office. You went from office to office and sat on the sofa and connected about what did you do last night and should we have lunch today and what's the latest project you're working on. But Bill and Joe made it feel like not like you were an employee, but like you were a member of the family. I was thinking the other day about that, maybe because I was thinking about this talk we're going to have, that I think despite, and I've done a lot of stuff in my career that I can be really proud of, but I think the happiest I ever was in my career was at Hanna-Barbera. I think it was something that I looked forward to going to work to every day, people I enjoyed hanging around with. I mean, wild characters. Yeah, have you got time for a quick story about one of the characters there?
Absolutely, yeah.
I thought about this at lunch today. I was having lunch with a friend and mentioning that this was coming up and how I'd been thinking about those days. And there was a writer named Lars Bourne, and he was a 6'5" Texan who talked like this. and you could have a conversation with him that would go on for hours. I mean, he was this big Texan Swede, and he was great because what he specialized in was doing like comic chases. So if I had a script that I had to get out and I had written everything except this big chase sequence, I could hand that off to Lars, as could anybody really, and say, Lars, would you give me a boat chase here, or an airplane thing, or a foot chase? And he would do these great comic gags. He just knew how to do them. He was also a terrific storyboard artist, so he could write them and sketch them out. So I remember walking down the hallway once and passing by his office, and I heard the sound of tap, 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 and I poked my head in, and he was at the Selectric typewriter with the one finger, hut and peck system, and he was going tap, 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 tap. And I said, Lars, why don't you pull one of the secretaries in and just dictate your script to her? And he said, oh no, he says, I can type a lot faster than I can talk. So Lars was great. Everybody was like a character from a sitcom. Every writer there had something special, something unique that was almost like one of the Hanna-Barbera characters. When shortly after I got there, there was a writer's strike. I don't remember exactly how it all dovetailed there, but because the writers couldn't, the bigger writers, the live action writers, the studio writers in town couldn't work on TV series live action, they discovered that they could write animation. So we got a lot of the writers. The main one I remember right now was Fred Freiberger, who was a big writer who'd done a lot of Star Treks and Bonanzas and just a lot of things. They all discovered that animation could give them regular work during the strike. So we had a big influx of some huge names. It was similar to once with Scooby, actually. I think it was one of the, I guess the Flintstones started part of that. But once actors on television and film realized that they could come over and do voices and get paid without having to have makeup and hair, and wardrobe every day, they began flooding into the studio. And the studio loved being able to say that they had, this actor or that actor coming in. They loved the names. And as a result, a lot of the really good voiceover artists got pushed out, which was a shame. But I think everybody came and realized what a good environment this was. They really had a great time because you didn't feel the pressure. You felt like it was a place to come and play. So in my mind, it's still one of my early playgrounds for writing, and I just can't forget that.
I still remember the outpouring of frustration from writers and artists when the old building on Cahuenga Boulevard got sold and converted into, I think it's a gym now?
Oh, it's a gym now, yeah. I drive by it almost every day for one reason or another, and I know where my office was, and I always look at that, and I wonder if I'm still in there in some way. The building looks the same, but it is, yeah, it's a gym and an office complex, and it's a shame.
What was the general perception of the franchise in the late 70s? I know that in 76, with the move to ABC and Joe and Ken coming back to develop that new iteration of the show, there was some hullabaloo there, but I read somewhere that with the first season of the Scooby-Doo Scrappy-Doo show, if they couldn't crack that character, if they couldn't get that show to work, the network wasn't interested in continuing with the show, and it was kind of a do-or-die situation.
The ratings were slipping when I came in. I and my writing partner at the time, a guy named Tom Swale, we had gone off to work with Sid and Marty Krofft. Let me back up. When I first got to town in 73, I worked by myself there for quite a while. And then one of the writers, a guy named Dick Robbins, knocked on my door one day and asked if I'd like to team up, because he liked my writing, and he thought he could bring his Hollywood history, or knowing kind of how the town worked and so on, to the partnership, and I could bring this fresh writing, I guess, to it. So we were a good team for quite a while, and became one of the prominent teams. In fact, when there was a drug special, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was
Cartoon All-Stars.
Cartoon All-Stars to the rescue. That was it. That was going to be combining the talents of all the studios to make this anti-drug half-hour episode. We were the ones who were asked to do it and work with Roy Disney and combine all those. So I was very flattered about that. We had a really good partnership for quite a while, and then it began not working out quite so well. And I had met Tom through friends, and we decided we would try it. He was about the same age I was, and we were both kind of new and excited about the Hollywood and what the possibilities might be. So we teamed up. We got hired by Sid and Marty Krofft to go over and do the Krofft Super Show, things like Wonderbug and Electro-Woman and Dyna-Girl, and a lot of just of those half-hour or 15-minute, some of them turned out to be live-action Saturday morning episodes. So once that had changed, we got hired back to Hanna-Barbera. Joe called and asked if we would come back and helm Scooby. So we came back and became writers and story editors and producers on a lot of different series. But one was Scooby because they were feeling that it needed some kind of fresh input. It needed something to brighten up the series, and that was our task. So we came on board and story edited from 1979, I think it was.
One of my initial questions was going to be, did Joe and Ken actually bring you in for that 76 Scooby-Doo Dynomutt Hour, but you only wrote a couple episodes there, and your real involvement with Scooby kind of started with Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo? Yeah,
one of the first... No, they knew us, but no, we were brought back in from Sid and Marty Krofft at that time. Still in the Saturday morning kids field, but live action instead of animation. And they made us a great offer, so we came back over, and one of our first meetings then was with Joe Barbera and Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, discussing how we could freshen up Scooby.
Was there any difference developing a show under ABC rather than CBS, where the show originally aired?
I didn't work on it at CBS. I just started with ABC, so that's the only perspective that I have on that, is how we were going to freshen it.
Fair enough. What was the actual turnaround time for scripts at the studio?
Oh, gosh, we gave most writers a couple weeks, I think, to write back then. That really is reaching back into my memory. I know later with Spelling and the Hour series, it was a couple weeks for an outline and 4 to 6 weeks for a script. So I'm guessing back then it might have been just a couple weeks for a script at most. But we were really hoping those would come in faster because there was so much to do. The script had to come in, it had to be storyboarded. There was so much to the animation process, especially back then without computers. It was all paint by numbers, and that took a while to get through the machine.
When coming up with story ideas, was it more of an organic process, or were there specifically designed villains that you wanted to execute and a story was written around them?
Oh no. It was a blank page. You came up with an idea. Sometimes it would be a location that we hadn't used before. Sometimes it would be a creature we hadn't used before. It's hard to say where it started. Sometimes it would be it was never Shaggy has a headache. I'll tell you that. But it was in some cases it would be something that was going on with the kids that led us to a story. But no, we didn't. We didn't just go down a line of creatures and start, putting plots around them. They came in a variety of ways.
At this point in the franchise's development, is there essentially a formula to writing a Scooby episode, particularly with the slapstick Scooby stuff? Was it kind of like insert scare here, insert gag there kind of thing?
It was a formula to the extent that the audience expected certain things. They expected the eating sequences and if you look at it, I can't remember all the formulas of all the elements of the formula, but if you look at them now, you can say, I see that in every, some version of that in every show. And that really helped for production as well, because if you could reuse a gag or reuse a sequence, there was a lot of the animation that you could reuse as well. We tried to save on that because it saved time in production and sped the process along. But it was mainly because the audience expected certain things. It's like contemporary comics or stories that the idea is that people want to, or singers. There's a singer who has a hit song. You want to hear that hit song. In a lot of ways, those gags were the Scooby Gang's hit songs. You wanted to play them every time in some version or another. Yeah.
I know these days the role of a story editor has a very hands-on role with every script. Was it the same back then in '79?
Oh, yeah. Well, everything, by the writer, it depended. As story editors, we wound up rewriting most everything that came in.
Okay.
Yeah, we were lucky when we got a writer who really could handle it and get very close, but being on the inside of a series, you realize there are certain things that work and certain things that don't. All the practical things. Again, jumping ahead to like Heart to Heart and the spelling stuff. There were scripts that would come in saying, "Oh, this would be perfect for Robert Wagner and Stephanie Powers to play," but the writers that sent those in didn't realize there were certain things that Stephanie or Robert would not do. You have a lot of information when you're on the inside, and you can't expect a writer to glean all that. So you take the best of what the writers brought in, and then you make it work.
I noticed on IMDb that you're only credited as story editor on, I believe, half the episodes of that first season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, and I wondered if you split the workload with Tom Swale on that year of shows.
We were doing a lot of stuff. That's one of those things that I'm fuzzy on. I don't remember how many. I was looking over the episode titles today, and I remember all those episode titles. So I'm pretty sure that I had something to do with all those. But at the same time, they brought us back to develop new series. So we were probably juggling that with development of, I don't know, Captain Caveman or Dynomutt and Blue Falcon or the other series that they had us putting our attention on. Bringing the Smurfs to television, we did that. There were so many things going on at once, and they threw a lot at us, which we were pleased to see. They trusted us with that,
At that point in time, Scooby wasn't the institution that it basically is today. I wondered, what kind of a position did it hold at Hanna-Barbera? Was there any prestige to the job? Was there any prestigious show at all at the studio?
Oh, that was something special. I mean, that was part of why we came back. It wasn't just the money and the title. This was Scooby-Doo, and as I mentioned, my recollection is that the ratings were falling off, and they needed some new blood to try to tackle it. And I've always loved a challenge, so we came back excited that it was Scooby. It was fun to write for these characters that we had known, and even though I was in mid college, I guess, when Scooby originally premiered, by the time I got to California in '73. And was working for Hanna-Barbera, Scooby was their star at the time. So I obviously watched those on Saturday mornings, and I got to appreciate him as much as some of the others that I've been working on. Yeah, he was a star at Hanna-Barbera.
A number of people who have moved on from the studio, they do not look back favorably on their time working on the franchise. And I just wondered, for you, looking back at the experience and the work and the show, what your feelings on that are.
I'm sure it depends how long they've been with it. If indeed you're right with the IMDb stuff that it was just half a season for me, then I'm still enthused, about that. But even a full season, which is what I recall, he was fun. He was fun, and all of my nieces and nephews, and the kids of friends and so on, they loved Scooby, so it was a good calling card. And the great thing about Scooby too is he never said I won't say that line, which I got a lot in my later career.
Just to clarify, when talking about the IMDb credits, it showed you as working on half of the episodes of that full year, so I just wondered if maybe you and Tom had split the episodes that you worked on, like you work on one, then he works on the next one.
No, I think both of our names should have been on all of those story editors as partners. So yeah, we didn't split that up.
Or if that's maybe just like a glitch in the IMDb system.
Yeah, I should have looked at my resume before I got on here today.
So there you go. That concludes part 1 of my conversation with Scooby-Doo story editor and writer Duane Poole. I hope you guys enjoyed our little chat, and that it has only whet your appetite. That is wet with an H for part 2. When we get into what some people would probably refer to as the meat of it, the good stuff, the beef, if you will. And you guys won't have long to wait for that because, like I said in the intro, I'm just in the process of cleaning up part 2, and I'm going to get that out to you guys as soon as I can. Definitely before the end of the month, you will have both parts of the Duane Poole interview in April. And that actually leads me into another little, not really a news bit, but something I'm kind of hoping to do with the podcast. I'm looking at going bi-weekly. The monthly schedule was practical. The monthly schedule had a lot to do with just straight logistics, scheduling interviews, life happens, and I do have another podcast that I produce. A lot more work goes into this one, so I went monthly just to kind of play it safe, but I just don't think it's... most of the interviews get split into 2 parts. I think I've only done 1 or 2 interviews. Steve Bramson and Jake Monaco come to mind. Strangely, only the music guys. I think there might be something to that. But anyways, waiting for part 2s, waiting a month for a second part, it feels like a long time. And I know some of you out there have communicated with me and you said that you don't listen to the first part until the second part comes out. So maybe that's just mean of me to do it. I'm looking at, trying a bi-weekly schedule, and I've got a pretty good backlog of interviews in the can right now, and I have a number scheduled to come. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable with where I am interview-wise, and I think I have enough content to take us into the summer. I think that might be the thing. I think I'm just going to try for the summer to kind of go bi-weekly, see how it goes, see if I have an aneurysm, and hopefully there'll be something to that. And I kind of like the symmetry of that. The 2-part interview, maybe one at the beginning of the month, one at the end of the month, or mid-month, end of the month, whatever. So there's that. And also, sort of touching on that same topic, I've recently posted a new blog post to the WordPress blog, a blog named Scooby-Doo, which is the companion blog to the podcast. Basically, it's talking about... I'm a big fan of the DC Hanna-Barbera line of comics coming out from DC Comics right now. I think, honestly, these are some of the best comic books that are being published. I don't believe I actually buy any other DC comic books. Anytime I go into a comic store, if I have a DC book in my hand, I'm walking out. It's a Hanna-Barbera character on the book. Rough and Ready, Scooby Apocalypse, Future Quests, Dastardly and Muttley, and Snagglepuss. Snagglepuss, which is fantastic right now. And at the end of last year, I said that I was thinking about exploring the DC Hanna-Barbera line on the show, since the podcast does have a mandate to cover the wider world of Hanna-Barbera, not just Scooby-Doo, although Scooby-Doo is obviously the focus. And I've started that process. I have spoken to J.M. DeMatteis. He's going to be coming back again to talk about Scooby Apocalypse Year 2. Hopefully that will just become a regular thing. J.M. will come in and chime in on what's been going on over the last 12 issues of the series. Who knows, maybe I can even squeak out some hints of where things are going. But I've also recently talked to writer Mark Russell, who worked on the Flintstones and is currently writing Snagglepuss. I have the artist of Snagglepuss on deck, Mike Feehan, and I'm currently pursuing other creatives involved with the imprint. I'm just kind of interested to explore these comics, to explore this take on the Hanna-Barbera characters, which I'm finding really quite compelling. You can check out that blog post, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. And if you have any thoughts on that, comment on the blog, comment on Facebook, comment on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at ScoobyDooCast. You can find me on Facebook. Just search a podcast named Scooby-Doo. I've already mentioned the WordPress blog, scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. And the show also posts to YouTube. So if you check out the show on YouTube, I know a few of you do, feel free to use the comment threads there. I can't think of anything else to throw out there. I'm sure. I have this nagging feeling that I'm missing something. But as I said, part 2 will be coming out sometime within the next 10 days. If I remember what it is, I'll throw it in there. Thanks again so much for joining me, guys. This is only half as fun without you out there listening. I really appreciate all your support. If you're one of the listeners on iTunes, I would totally appreciate you taking the time to subscribe, rate, and review the show, as it helps grow the audience in a quantifiable way. And I love to hear what you guys think of the podcast. Like, share, follow on all the social media, share amongst family and friends. Share amongst strangers. Stranger danger. Stranger danger. Will Robinson. I hope you all stay well, and we'll catch you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Evil and whatnot.
Everybody cheer! This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery. So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.